We are back on Taking Care of Business on News Talk 1180 Kern, 1230 KGEO, 1410 KERN, and now in Albuquerque, New Mexico on 1000 KKIM. Our guest by phone, economist, professor, talk show host, somebody who definitely likes to rattle the cage, Professor Walt Williams.
And he has it together, I have to tell you.
I enjoy having you on, Professor Williams.
Thank you. Yeah, I take pride in being able to be honest with my fellow American, because I don't aspire to high political office or a big-paying government job.
Well, which is the same way we feel, and definitely none of the three of us have it, so we're safe. I had a couple questions for you on the economy, since you're an economist. You look at Detroit declaring bankruptcy. Corporate tax is what, 35%? By the time you're done with the taxes in Detroit, you're looking at something I heard that's over 50%. My hometown is about 220 miles east of Detroit, Toronto, Canada. Corporate tax rate is 15%. The city is growing by leaps and bounds. We just don't get it, do we? I mean, what is it going to take for us to realize that we're chasing business away?
That's right, and I think that we're the second highest corporate tax jurisdiction of the industrialized nations.
Yes, and Canada's the lowest in the Group 7.
That's right, and I think that one of the great things about our country and how we emerged to become a great and rich country was that we had relatively low taxes, relatively little government interference in the economy, and government was such a very small part of our country. Most people don't realize. The federal government alone spends 25% of the GDP each year.
Wow.
25%. Now, keep in mind that between 1787 and 1920, when we went from being a third world nation, poor third world nation in 1787, until the richest nation, 1920, 1925, federal spending was only 3% of the GDP, except during wartime. And state and local governments, they were a total of 9% of the GDP. So total government spending was anywhere between 11 and 12% of the GDP. Today, total government spending, if you add the federal government, state and local governments, you're talking about over 40% of the GDP. And translate that into everyday thinking, that the average taxpayer, in order to pay federal, state, and local taxes, he must work from January 1st until the end of April or the beginning of May, depending on what state he lives in, to pay federal, state, and local taxes. Now, keep in mind that the founders of our nation, they did not want to work from January 1st until January 10th. For King George, and they went to war with the mightiest nation on the face of the earth. But look, we Americans, we've become serfs. We've become slaves to government at various levels.
Yeah, it's crazy. One of our guests last week was a gentleman named Bill Glenn from the USA Association, and he brought up an interesting thought, and I've been thinking about it this past week, and I thought, it might work. His suggestion is to not have any corporate tax for a 5-year period. He says the economy will grow in leaps and bounds and the coffers will be full and the government will have nothing to complain about. Do you think that kind of concept would work?
Well, I think anything we can do to lower taxes in general. That is, I think that the nation is better off if we keep money in our pockets as opposed to going to Washington D.C. because most of the money spent in Washington by the federal government is nothing more than legalized theft. That is where the federal government takes the property of one American and gives it to another to whom it does not belong. And you look at and that constitutes roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of all federal spending. I don't care whether you're talking about farm subsidies, food stamps, business bailouts, Social Security, Medicare, prescription drugs, and all that stuff. It's where government takes what belongs to one American and gives it to another to whom it does not belong. Just legalized theft. And for the Christians among us, I think that when God gave Moses the commandment, "Thou shalt not steal," I'm pretty sure that he did not mean "thou shalt not steal" unless you got a majority vote in Congress.
That's an addendum to the new edition of the Bible, right? We're having a conversation with economist, professor, all-around good guy, Dr. Walt Williams.
Dr. Williams, you have convinced me that next year, from January until May, I'm not going to work. I'm going to go on vacation so I don't have to pay taxes, and then I'll work the rest of the year.
No. You won't be able to get. Let me know how that turns out.
Well, based on this show, I may be talking to you from the jail cell. I'm not sure.
Right.
Tell me, is health care a right?
No. A right is something that exists simultaneously and does not impose a burden on anybody else. For example, my right to free speech imposes no burden on you whatsoever except that of non-interference. My right to travel imposes no burden on you except that you just don't interfere. But if you talk about somebody having a right to health care, that does impose a burden on somebody else. That is, the government does not get the money to take care of people who need help. Need health care. They don't get. He doesn't get it from Santa Claus or Tooth Fairy. The only way that the government can give one American citizen $1 is to first, through intimidation, threats, and coercion, confiscate that dollar from some other American person. And so, I don't think anyone has the right to live at the expense of somebody else.
Well, you throw in welfare, unemployment, food stamps, and all these other programs. There doesn't seem to be any limit to those programs. Don't you agree?
Oh, and you're absolutely right. Once you start down the slippery slope, it's no end to it. There's no end to it. And people, a lot of people will say, and I hope I'm not being too pessimistic, but a lot of people say, ask me, Walter, what can be done about all this? What can be done about our national decline? Well, I asked them, are Americans any different from the Romans or the French or the Spanish or the Portuguese or the British? These are great empires of the past that went down the tubes for doing precisely what we're doing, going out for bread and circuses. And so I'm all too afraid that a similar fate awaits Americans somewhere in our future.
This has not just been caused by Barack Obama's administration, but he seems to be accelerating it. Don't you agree with that?
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. George Bush did a pretty good. Under the Bush administration, I think spending the rate of spending equaled that of the Johnson administration.
Wow.
And so, and Obama is just really carrying the ball forward,
along with the apologies.
Oh yeah, right. And so, when you tell people that they have the right to live at the expense of somebody else, when do they stop? And if you tell one person that he has the right to live at the expense of somebody else, well, why not give me that right as well?
Makes sense. Dr. Williams, I've got a question for you in our final 2 minutes. We're looking at supposedly we have all this job growth. Well, I saw a statistic the other day that 3/4 of the new jobs this year are all people working part-time, under 29 hours a week for some strange reason. Wouldn't have anything to do with Obamacare. Can we survive as an economy with that kind of job growth? We're turning into a part-time economy.
Well, I think so to a very significant degree. I think more part-time jobs than people have ever had in terms percentage-wise, and more young people living back home with their families. And then also something that's totally ignored by the media, and when people claim, we have this job growth, is the so-called discouraged worker. That is, the labor force participation rate is about the lowest that has ever been in our history. And labor force participation rate means the extent to which a particular demographic groups are active in the labor market. That is, many people have gone out to try to get a job and can't find a job, and they just get discouraged, the so-called discouraged worker. And so those people are no longer entered into the unemployment statistics, because the unemployment statistics used means that you have to be able, willing, and looking for work. And if you're not able and willing and looking for work, you're not in the labor force.
That's for sure. This past week, I gave a speech or a talk, a webinar at the local university through the Small Business Development Center on Obamacare, and I hope some people paid attention to what we had to say, because it's really a bad piece of legislation. But before we leave, can you again give us your blog or your website so people can follow you a little bit?
Yeah, the website is walterewilliams.com. And it has a lot of useful stuff. Matter of fact, and for the ladies in the audience, it's a very handsome photo of me there that they can kind of cut out and put beside on a mirror or wherever.
And they can submit for amnesty also, correct?
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, right. Also at walterewilliams.com is the gift in the right hand corner, and then I carry all my columns and all my publications, and a lot of good stuff's there.
Dr. Williams, thank you. We got to have you back, and thank you so much for the time.
Always enjoy you, Dr. Williams.
Guys.
We'll be back in 167 hours on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk 1180.